companies, brands putting out all sorts of content on all different channels. And the biggest problem that we see is all of their content is just about them. It's about their products, their services, their features, and it's not about the customer. So, really you need to start at the beginning. So, you got to pull back and you got to look at what are your customers' problems? What are their concerns? What questions are they asking? And you talk to your customers and you find out what problems they are dealing with that you can help them out with. And then you come up with this list of all the questions that you can answer that will help them, all the areas where you are an expert that you're going to provide content and answers that other people aren't providing, that they can't just go out and find on Google. You're really going to focus specifically on that very particular audience.
Hey, everybody, we're back. It's Over a Pint. I'm in the studio once again with Mr. Kurt Lingo. We got Brian Piper going on this. Before we introduce Brian, Kurt, how you doing? How was your Super Bowl? This is the kind of time of year that, a lot of energy gets spent on the
Super
the ads and so forth.
It was. Yeah, it seems like forever ago. It was good. Super Bowl was good. Good eats, good drinks, and obviously we took in the game. But was there any ad in particular that stuck out to you?
Unfortunately, we were over at a neighbor's house, and so the game was on, and but everybody's talking and it's like it's kind of just background. So I saw things like the Will Ferrell one. I saw some of the liquor ones, but it wasn't like I was tuned into it.
You know which one stuck out to me? So my observation this year was it seemed like I was paying attention to some of the ads that were kind of like the theme of we're not advertising in the Super Bowl. And I don't know if either Brian or Pat, did you see what Camping World was doing?
No, I didn't see that. Mm-mm.
Okay. It was kind of cool, kind of funny. If you remember, The Office kind of had that video pan kind of look and face. Yep. Anyway, if you check it out online, I thought it was kind of funny. They were playing something. The tag was something along the lines of, "We can't afford it, so you can." Makes sense. So anyway,
cool.
It was good.
Well, Kurt, we're back today. We got Brian Piper on here. Before I introduce him,
Looking forward to it.
Everybody who is just listening to this, maybe for the first time, this is called Over a Pint Marketing. What we do is we get on guests and we break down what's going on in the world of marketing. And today, Brian is going to be going deep into content marketing, which this is applications for everybody who's going to be listening to the show. I mean, and I don't care what vertical you're in. And Kurt, we've touched a ton of different verticals. Content is a key factor in your marketing plan. And we got the guy who freaking wrote the book, like literally wrote the book.
I see the book.
Yeah. Let's bring him on. Hey, Brian, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much, Pat. So great to be on.
This is awesome. Brian, before we get into all the good stuff, right, and all the meat of this podcast, let's start with what you got in front of you. It's called Over a Pint for a reason. Sir, you have the mic. What do you have?
Well, so I have a couple of things. The first thing I have is water because I'm hydrating because It's the middle of the day and I have a 3-hour drive ahead of me. So, but when I get home tonight, I have Omegang's wheat beer. So they're one of my favorite New York breweries and they're fantastic. It's a great brewery and they do all sorts of concerts and events there as well as putting out great beer.
Brian, give me the name of that again. What is that?
Hold it up a little bit more, Brian. There you go.
It's Omegang. Ommengang.
Whoa, that sounds cool. Kurt, if you're
Brian? Is that a local beer? Or is it a?
It's actually from Cooperstown. And so you can go see the baseball Hall of Fame and go right over and have some great beer and a concert and
Very, very cool.
That is cool. Kurt, what do you got, man?
Pat, this might be a first for me. We always say, like on the show, enjoy whatever type of liquid you want: water, tea, coffee, soda. I'm having local today, but it is local coffee. I'm drinking some Collectivo, Pat. It's a snowstorm today, and I'm going with Collectivo coffee. So sorry, folks, no brewski, but it is local. Cheers.
Two hands on the wheel. You got it. I am in the home studio. I've got a new Glarus Spotted Cow. I just had a taste for this today, so that's what I'm going to be enjoying it with. About a quarter cup of coffee remaining. Cool. We've got that out of the way. Brian, thank you again for being on the show. Let's start with this. Why don't you give everyone listening a quick background about you and give us kind of an understanding of just your range in the space. So the mic is yours, sir. Start off.
Yeah, so it depends on how far back you want to go. I had kind of an eclectic upbringing. Yeah. So I was born in California, but grew up on a rabbit farm in Dogpatch, Arkansas. So usually some sort of, people usually don't believe it as soon as they say that, but it's true. Came out of high school, went to SUNY Albany for 3 semesters, decided that college was not for me at the time, so joined the Army. Started jumping out of airplanes back then, which is something I've done ever since then. And then when I got out of that, I was stationed in Germany for 2 years in the Army, which is where I got my love for wheat beers. So I've been drinking wheat beers ever since then as well. And went back to school at Missouri State, and where I studied creative writing and philosophy. So I was basically, ready to wait tables my whole life. My dad had a company in Rochester, New York, making computer-based training is what it was called at the time. E-learning is what we know it, as today, online learning, and doing website development. So he offered me a job. I came up, started working with him. I was not a very good web developer. He had some very talented developers working on his staff, and I got to learn all sorts of great things from them. But when it came down to doing the bulk of the work, they would, they'd take on the coding and they'd leave me to do the content part of things. So started learning how to optimize content and thinking about the audience and thinking about, search engines and web positioning, which later became SEO. After a couple of years, he laid me off, and I worked at an ad agency leading their web team for several years. And then I transitioned into a defense contracting company where I was doing training development. Still not super thrilled with my job, wasn't passionate about it. And then in 2014, I read Epic Content Marketing, the first edition. And, as soon as I was done, I was like, this is amazing. You can sell things by telling stories and helping people out and giving useful information. So I went right down to the VP of marketing at the company. I went into her office and I said, you need to hire me to do digital marketing. She's like, we don't do digital marketing. I said, well, you should. And, here's why. I gave her a list of reasons. So she did. And so in the first year of working on the content side of things, I doubled our organic traffic to our website, worked on some large, website integration projects and content migration projects. And those kind of led to my current job at the University of Rochester, the director of content strategy and assessment. And within the first 2 weeks of starting that job, they sent me to Content Marketing World, which is the largest, content marketing conference anywhere. So I saw, amazing speakers, Andrew Davis and Ann Handley. And then I saw people, like Chris Penn and Andy Crestodina up there talking about data and SEO. I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's also the year that I met Joe. I hunted Joe down and I took a selfie with him and I thanked him for writing that book that changed my entire career path and, got me passionate about the work I was doing, which I did every year I went to that conference. I would track him down and take a selfie with him and thank him for that. And, so once I got back on campus, I really started pursuing, making all the content work really well. I doubled our organic traffic to our news center, and that went so well, they had me start giving presentations around the institution and workshops on SEO and keyword research and optimization. Right. And so then I started presenting at industry conferences, which eventually led me into, that's where I met you, Pat.
Yeah.
And that eventually led me into presenting at Content Marketing World. And that's when I really got, to form a better friendship with Joe and spend more time hanging out with him and connecting with him. So that's kind of how I've gotten to the point where I am today.
The long and winding road.
Wow. Man, that's crazy. That's awesome story. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.
Great story.
To give everybody a sense too, and I just want to take a pause here for a moment. Epic Content by Joe. How pronounce his last name? Polizzi. Epic Content by Joe Polizzi. For those in the space, this is a game-changing book, right? I mean, this really, really kind of opened people's idea that of what content could be.
Right? Yeah,
right?
I mean, Joe was really one of the they call him the godfather of content marketing, and he and Robert Rose started the Content Marketing Institute, and that's and they really kind of legitimized the term content marketing.
So, and I want to get into content. What how are you defining it, Brian? And we're going to go deep into that. But what's fascinating is, to me, is like, okay, cool, yeah, you run into authors. I've run into authors. I've run into people. I've taken selfies with them. How do you go from, hey, that book was really cool, to, hey, I want you to co-write a book with the next version with me? Like, how does that happen? Because that's amazing.
Yeah, and it was, part of it was every time I would talk to Joe, I would be like, this book was so great, but it's starting to get dated now. You still have Google Plus in there, you have some old references and old data in there. It really needs to be updated. So the last year, when I was presenting at Content Marketing World 2021, we got to, hang out after the conference for a while. And I kept, kind of bugging him and saying, well, you just wrote a second edition of this other book that you did, Content Inc. And, it was great, but, come on, epic content marketing. That's the key piece there, the Bible of content marketing. And so, he hemmed and hawed a little bit. And then 2 weeks after the conference, we were in this book review discussion in the Content Marketing Institute Slack channel. And we were talking about his book, Content Inc., the second edition of that. And he was in there answering questions. There were probably only 5 of us in there. And so then once again, I was like, Joe, when are you going to do the second edition? He said, all right, co-author it with me and I'll do it. And I said, yes, absolutely. So yeah, and that led into, the second edition that we worked on together.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
If I could, the one thing, what I found interesting, and first of all, again, I got to say, I go back to your story, Brian, and I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your service, by the way. That was the first thing that you had mentioned, like, wow, that's a very cool story. But, as I was kind of doing some research and reading through things, it's, the key word is that I was picking up on is, and it was a reminder to me, I use myself as a guinea pig, marketing. It's like content marketing, and and I was like, and then that it was a reoccurring theme. I'm like, okay, it's right. The more I think about it, the more it's like, yeah, there is a big difference about how this is approached and what it means. So when you're saying what content is, it's like what content is and what it isn't. It's like content marketing. It's a big part of what you're pushing here, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen, we've got some great case studies in the book, and just some brands out there just killing it and really, leveraging this format. And, we're seeing more and more brands getting into this.
Cool. And we're going to get into some of those case studies in a minute, but
for sure.
Brian, let's start with this. Define content marketing. Just give us the baseline. Like, when we're talking about content marketing, in your head, Brian, you wrote the book, right? What define this for us. Just let's start breaking this thing down.
Yeah. So, in the book, of course, we define at the beginning of the book, we define content marketing. So basically it's the process for creating and distributing valuable and compelling content. So those are, key important words there, valuable and compelling. And then you're putting that content out there to attract, acquire, and engage a very defined and understood audience. And the objective is to drive some sort of profitable customer action. So it doesn't have to be at the moment they read the content, but that content is part of a funnel that is pushing the user towards taking some action. And that is content marketing, because we see a lot of content being put out there, but if it doesn't have the end goal of making the user take some action, it's not content marketing.
So, Brian, as a follow-up then, okay, now that we have this definition, maybe you could share with us, what are the steps that you take? How do you get from 0 to 1, right? Like, what are the things, if you're an organization, and let's put it like this, there's probably plenty of organizations who kind of dabbled their foot in it. And by that, I mean, yeah, we had a blog post. We don't do blog anymore. We do some of the social things, but it's kind of sporadic. So get the whiteboard, we're wiping this clean. How do you begin to approach doing content marketing effectively? It's a lot there, I know, but you're amazing. You'll break it down for us.
Well, and You bring up a great point. There are, companies, brands putting out all sorts of content on all different channels. And the biggest problem that we see is all of their content is just about them. It's about their products or their services or their features, and it's not about the customer. So, really you need to start at the beginning. So, you got to pull back and you got to look at what are your customers' problems? What are their concerns? What questions are they asking? And you talk to your customers and you find out what problems they are dealing with that you can help them out with. And then you come up with this list of all the questions that you can answer that will help them, all the areas where you are an expert that you're going to provide content and answers that other people aren't providing, that they can't just go out and find on Google. You're really going to focus specifically on that very particular audience. Then you put all those questions up there, you make it, entertaining, engaging, educational, and that's it. You just share all that knowledge with them without asking for anything. And that's really where you would need to start, is figuring out what are your customers' concerns, questions, and problems, and then how can you provide the best answers and solutions for them.
What's interesting is I always like simplicity is something I always like. I think we all do, right? That's keep it simple. And you had said something where it was written where if we stopped putting out, delivering content, whatever the right word is, if we stopped doing this, would our customers notice or would they care? And it always seems to me is that the objective? Is that kind of what eliminates and keeps things within the playing set? Like if you're thinking about what should that content be, is that almost like the Holy Grail? It's like, okay, great. You've got 10 things on the table. Wonderful. Now let me ask you the final question. If this didn't get in the hands of your customer, would they care? Is there something you said about that, Brian? Is that kind of that keeps you accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's finding your voice and finding the value, the unique value that you can add. And there are, like newsletters that I get. There are some newsletters that I look forward to every day, the Morning Brew, the Hustle. Ann Handley puts out a newsletter every 2 weeks. And I love it. As soon as I get it, I open it right up and I read it because I know it's going to be great. It's going to be entertaining. It's going to have valuable content in there. And then I probably get 30 other newsletters that sometimes I'll open, sometimes I'll read if it looks like, if the subject line looks good. But the ones that I read every day, all the time, are the ones that I know. I know I can trust them. I know they're going to have opinions about things. I know they're going to give me valuable information, and it's going to come across in a voice that I want to consume.
Ryan, you talked about starting with problems, getting questions answered. Okay, cool. What's next?
Yeah, I mean, then the next thing
after that
is picking your channel. So, you know your customer, you know what their problems are. Now, where are they? You have to go find them. So we can, deduce from demographics and generalities what audiences are most prevalent on which channels, or what audiences like to consume things, a particular way. But a lot of times when we go in and we work with, a brand or an institution, as we're doing all of this, user education, the user audit, where we really talk to them and try to figure out who their users are, we ask them to talk with their users. That's where they get, the most of the questions. A lot of them can come from, customer service people. You can do online polls, all sorts of different ways you can build personas, but talking with your actual customers is the best way. And, while you're having those conversations and learning what their pain points are, that's the time to figure out where they are consuming content. Do they prefer blogs? Would they rather get something in their email? And, it's all about figuring out not only what are their questions and their problems, but what are the key factors that cause them to make a particular decision? What are their decision-making criteria? What can you offer them one way or another that's going to help convince them eventually that you're the service or the product that they should be consuming?
You touched on something just a minute ago that, Kurt, we have heard this time and time again, right? The people who have a lot of success have found a way to get that kind of customer information loop just humming, right? I mean, they're dialed into their customer. It just keeps coming up, right? With just so many of these interviews that we've done. And, Brian's talking about it again. Brian, it seems to me that an issue that companies and organizations run into is that kind of let's crawl before we walk and let's walk before we run. And by that, I mean, if our customer or our target is living on LinkedIn, let's go LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and what else could we go into, right? I mean, that's a natural thing is to go from, or to try to go from 0 to 60 like that, like within, right? How do you,
everywhere.
Yeah. How do you just put the governor on when you're having conversations with clients or when you're talking to people? Like, we'll get there. We'll get there. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the key is to pick one platform where you can be great and where you can really showcase yourself. Eventually, yeah, maybe you can try out, experiment with some of the other platforms, but start off with just one channel and pick that and make that your flagship channel. Now, I'm not saying don't use the other channels to promote that content, but the majority of that content should live on one channel, should start on one channel. And then once you get some traction there and start building an audience and start creating a community, that's when you're going to be able to start looking at other channels and looking to, leverage the other audiences that are out there.
Brian, if I could, let me follow up with that a little bit. Because I want you to maybe explain to our audience. We've got content marketing, social media marketing. And I mean, admittedly, sometimes when you hear a lot of times content marketing, content right away, it's like, what social do sometimes those get blurred and sometimes it's like people assume they're one? Explain to us the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So content marketing can happen across, all channels. So you can do content marketing on social channels and it is then social marketing, but also on social channels, you can do non-marketing posts. You can just do, information sharing. You can do, you can promote other people's posts. You can network and collaborate. But when it comes to, specifically content marketing, whether it's, on social or in your blog or your newsletter or your videos, it's all about, creating content that will cause that conversion, they'll cause that action. So when you're doing action focused, funnel based content that you're putting out on social, that is content marketing. It's also, social marketing.
Yeah. My guess is there's a lot of us out there who don't break it down that way. So it's not like we're sitting down in a war room and we're thinking, hey, what is our content marketing strategy? What is our social media marketing strategy? I have a funny feeling there's a lot of us, and I say us because I think we're all, we learn as we go. It's like, what is our social media strategy, for a lack of a better word? It's like, what is it? It's like, well, no, the way we're talking about it is like, you got to start thinking about these. These are two different things. Both need two different, they need resources and they need to be attended to differently, different strategies.
Absolutely. And anytime we start working with, a brand or institution, the first audit that we do is a strategy audit. What are your, institutional big business strategies and goals? What are those first? Now look at what's your website strategy? What's your social media strategy? What's your content marketing strategy? Because all of those come into play and different tactics on each of those different channels needs to directly connect with your strategy for that channel, but they all need to ladder up to your main big institutional brand strategies. So it's creating those connections and making sure you understand all of how those connect and are all pointing towards the same goal. And if someone comes to you with a piece of content and says, this is a great piece of, a great white paper we're going to create or great blog post we're going to write, well, how does that connect to our strategies? And how does that help us reach our goals? And how is that going to take our primary audience and create them, create some action from them that's going to help us reach our goals? So it's really connecting all of those little pieces, to get the big picture. because otherwise you're just, you're just throwing content out and hoping someone's paying attention and hoping that it does something, and then of course on the back end of all of that is, is all the tracking. You got to make sure you're tracking and looking at your data. Otherwise you're not, you don't know what's working and what's not working.
Right. When you started writing the book, and again, this was a seminal piece, and I know you mentioned in the beginning that it was starting to get a little bit long in the tooth in certain sections. There were just some technologies that were, had come and gone and so forth. What other surprises did you run into, Brian, writing this book? Like how much has the content space changed, and what were some of those changes?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we first started, Joe and I got together and we talked about it. We're like, all right, let's just throw it all out and let's just start over fresh, from the beginning. And so we started doing that, and within the first 2 chapters, we were like, this really looks very similar to what we had in the first edition, because there's a lot in that first edition that is still very applicable. The strategies, the steps, the focus on customers, all those haven't changed at all in 10 years. So really the first 2/3 of the book, we just took the previous edition, updated the case studies, changed the stats in it, made sure that everything was current. We're using current technologies and different channels. But then the whole last third of the book was all new. So Web3, AI, communities, superfans, data, we dive into each one of those different aspects that has really changed the face of content marketing and will continue to change content marketing.
And from your standpoint, how was the process of just writing a book?
It was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. I mean, at the beginning, I figured out, how much time I had, how much I had to write every day. And then really, started writing. And I realized very quickly that, even though I'd been in the industry for 10 years, there was a lot that I needed to learn and research and understand better and really dig into, all the particulars around the particular topics we were talking about. So it was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. It was great to have Joe to collaborate with, and then we'd pass chapters back and forth. We'd update them, we'd look at them, we'd talk about it. And so I was surprised at how much I learned in the process, as well as, how much fun it was for as much work as it was.
How long, if I could ask, because we've heard this before, we've had folks on, it is a lot of work. And how long of a process is that? So for example, for this particular project, how long are we talking to work on this?
So from the time we got the original files back from the publisher for the first edition, which we were waiting for, I don't know, a month or 2 before they were able to get those to us, until we had to have the second edition submitted to them, was 6 months. So I figured out, 1,000 words a day, that, I can get that done. That's not too bad. It's like a blog post every day, and, a lot of editing and work back and forth. But I didn't plan in how long it would take me to do the research and to do the interviews and to come up with the questions. So really the last month or month and a half of working on the book, it was 12 hours a day, every day, just sitting, writing, focusing, explaining to my wife and kids that they're going to have to, get dinner out or something like that. So it was a arduous process, but incredibly rewarding at the end of it.
That's awesome.
Cool. That's cool. You touched on this, and I want to double click on it a little bit more. Brian, is the research, going through the book, there are some really cool case studies in here, and I'm hoping that you could share maybe 1 or 2 examples of who in the space is killing it. And let's kind of just dive into some of these things, because I think some of the learnings that Kurt and I will walk away with, and all of our listeners, I think it's going to be really important. So who's killing it, man, and why?
Yeah, one of the first ones that we talk about in the book, that was actually in the first edition, was River Pools and Spas. So it was a pool company in 2008. Nobody was installing pools, right? Nobody was buying anything they didn't need to buy. So they were on the brink of going out of business. They were just a small local pool installation company. And so the owner of the company was thinking, what can I possibly do? How can I change this? We can't just go out and sell more pools. So he decided to write down a list of all the questions anyone had ever asked them. He put that up on their website, and all of a sudden they started getting more traffic. They started getting national traffic, more people coming and finding that they were the experts in this space. And they leveraged that, and they offered up, phone consultations with no charge. They, call you and talk to you about your project and your problem, and give you ideas and recommendations. And it worked out so well for them. They recently got into creating. They were doing so many installations, they couldn't keep up with the fiber. They couldn't buy enough of the fiberglass inserts that they were using to do these new pool installations. So they actually created their own manufacturing company, and now they're one of the largest manufacturers of pool liners in the world, and they do consultations around the world. And now the owner of the company, Marcus Sheridan, is also a consultant for content marketing, and he goes and he teaches other people how to do exactly what he did. But it was all content marketing. It was all putting up those questions and answers on their blog and giving that information away to solve the problems that their customers had.
What else was he doing though, Brian? So that's an awesome story, right? And what's so cool about it too is, company's about to go under. He takes this Hail Mary approach. It works out. And now this guy is like kicking it, right? I mean, he's like the man in the pool space. So a couple things have got to happen. One, he's got to be producing quality content. Like his things are hitting the mark. Okay, check. That's a big check. But the second thing too is, how does he getting people there? What was his steps for getting people to just even engage with the content?
See the questions, yeah.
Yeah, and it was SEO. It was organic traffic. So he was just putting those questions out there, and Google likes to see websites that have a wealth of knowledge around a particular topic area, and even more so now than it was, 10 years ago. But so that's what he did. No one else online was answering these questions. No one had this resource for people. So anyone who was looking to install a pool or had questions about what the cost was, he would put it right on the webpage. He wouldn't hide it. He wouldn't make you come in and request a quote. And so he would just put it up there, and that drove so much traffic to his site and created so much business for him that, it changed their entire dynamic.
I can anticipate this. Somebody's out there listening to this and goes, wow, that is a cool story. Man, if he could do it with pools, maybe I could do it with whatever I'm in. But that was 2008. Man, we're in 2023. That model doesn't work anymore. What do you say to that person who's out there who's thinking that?
I say that if you are providing information that no one else is providing, or you are providing the best information in your space, or you have found a particular audience, a particular niche area that you can focus on, this absolutely works. And that's one of the keys to doing content marketing well, is really identifying your specific target user and just giving them really good content. Because we know there's a ton of content out there. There's so much content out there, right?
Sure.
Andrew Davis does a great presentation about not only answering the frequently asked questions, but you have to answer the rarely asked questions, because those are the ones that you can't find on Google, right? You've got to answer those questions that you can't just go out and search on Google and find the answer and there you go. You need to figure out how to answer those questions that, the C-suite are asking, that are different than the questions that the person, doing the actual work is asking. But you've got to have both of those questions answered. You've got to feature all of that on the website. You've got to target the decision makers, and you've got to target the people doing the actual work that are asking the broad questions as well. And, Google loves that as well. They love to see a variety of content around a particular area.
What I like about that example is I'm thinking about some of the shares you provided us in this conversation, and I'm thinking about, again, I always like to be held accountable. Whatever we do, whatever goes into an ad, it's got to matter. Whether you're talking about content marketing, whether you're talking about a TV spot, a video spot, print ad, that's always been the rule of thumb. If I keep this word in here, if I keep this sentence in here, what is it going to matter? Is it important to the customer? So I think about what you were saying, Brian. What's neat about that example, and again, I think about the key pillars. It was genuine. It wasn't about him, and the information was something that mattered. So we had said before, it's like, if I don't provide this information, will my customer notice or care? And I think that was a good example where it's like genuine, not about him, and it mattered. It was good, so it's like, if you can take those lessons and always apply that pillar, it probably will lead you down the right path more often than not. I think that's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing he did is he watched what questions were getting more traffic and what questions were leading to conversions or to requests, and then he built out more content around those particular question areas as well. So you really got to focus in on what's working and do more of that.
This kind of reminds me of a case of an example that's in the book, and that's Poor Richard's Almanac, which is a great story. Brian, would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's putting out content that the audience can't get anywhere else. It's figuring out, how to tell the story in a way that shows your personality, in the story and in the telling of it. Yeah, and I think that's one of the first examples of content marketing. Definitely.
Who else, Brian? If do you have another example of a case study of somebody you researched that you could share with us from the book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best case studies is Cleveland Clinic. They, started off with 3 people on their content marketing team who were kind of split out from the marketing department. And they just started working on one of their blogs, and they really started focusing on the customer. A physician would come and say, "Oh, you've got to put this story in here about this new health issue that we're facing." And they'd say, "Well, no, unless a customer really has a question about that, and we can help them and provide useful information to them." And so, they really made that a focus. They were very intentional about the content they put out. They hired SEO experts to help them figure out what questions people were asking. And they talked to a lot of patients to figure out what their concerns were and what problems they had and what they liked and didn't like. And they went from, about 200,000 hits per year, and now they're going to hit 1 billion hits a year this year. They've grown their team from 3 people to 80 people. And instead of, they started monetizing their content and putting, ads into their blog. And it started off just as kind of an experiment. And now it's a leading revenue source for, Cleveland Clinic. So now it's part of the overall budget. It goes into the bottom line. And, the head of Amanda Todorovich is the head of the content marketing team over there. And she's just killing it.
That's just, I can't believe you can go from 3 to now 80. That's just mind blowing of how they were able to do that. Brian, if you're doing content marketing correctly, how fast does it take? How long does it take before you start seeing results? Like, what are those things that's like, okay, I'm committed. We're going to start doing this, but you have to start off slow. You probably, like, if you're just starting off, you're probably maybe 1, maybe 2 people who are doing it. You might not know exactly what you're doing, but in order to get some traction, you've got to see, hey, things are starting to work here, right? What are things that you recommend to people? It's like, keep an eye on this. Take a look at this. What are those kind of data points that it's like, that could tell you you're moving in the right direction with what you're doing?
Yeah, and really the key to content marketing is consistency. You have to set up a regular schedule. You have to set up a pace so that your users know when you're going to be putting out new content. Are you going to do, a podcast every week? Are you going to do it every 2 weeks? Once you figure out that schedule, you have to commit to it and stick to it because your customers expect it. And all you have to do is miss one time and they're like, these people aren't going to show up anymore. I better go find somewhere else to get this information. So we tell people when we start, if you're going to get into content marketing, you have to be able to commit for at least a year. You're not going to, you're going to see results. You're going to see it slowly growing. But in order to see significant impact or impact that you can clearly attribute to your content marketing, you got to commit to a year at least. Now, there are ways to, see a faster impact. There are ways you can cluster your content together and organize your content in a way that will increase your search rankings much more quickly than other methods. But in general, if you're not going to commit to a year of content marketing, then you should probably just keep spending your money on traditional marketing and keep hoping that it works. As much as we see, paid marketing not being as effective as it used to be because people aren't consuming as many ads. They're skipping over their ads, or they're finding channels that don't have ads, or paying to avoid ads. Or, they don't trust the people who are serving them the ads because they know they're just being sold something. They're not being given something. They're not being helped. They're not having their problem solved. So that's, we see the value of content marketing going beyond just, putting the content out and helping them with their problem. It's really creating that trust with your users and letting them come into your community and be part of your brand.
When you're talking about the consistency, Brian, and I agree, it's probably consistency with anything, but doing it right. So, there's a commitment. All right, you've got a brand, and they say there's a team of people. We're going to commit. We're going to commit to content marketing. Or we're gonna do our best to do the things that we're talking about here in this episode. We're going to do the A, B's, and C's. When you talk about results, what are the things that people should start to look for immediately? So, because obviously results, it probably depends, right? It's going to be like, what is the objective? But what I like about what you're talking about with content marketing, it always comes back to a measurable. It always comes back to an action. So if I start to do this and I commit to a year, where do you start to see where are those first triggers happening? Like, where's the first domino? Like, I'm doing something right because I see something happening here. What is it?
Yeah, and so that's a question we get asked a lot, and the unsatisfying answer is, it depends. It all goes back to that first audit, your strategy. You have to know what your goals are, where you want to go, right? If you go out to drive around and you don't know where you're going, how are you going to measure if you're succeeding or not? So first, figure out where you're going. What are your end goals? What's your end state ideally going to be? And then those are the things that you're going to set up to measure. And then, depending on what channel it is. If it's your blog, you want to see more organic traffic and better search rankings, or if if the bottom line is revenue, you want to see more conversions. You want to see more people getting to the bottom of the funnel. So what metrics you measure depend on your overall strategy and depend on the channel that you're on and your users too. Because sometimes, if you're just looking for brand awareness, like Cleveland Clinic, they are looking to answer questions that people have. They're looking to create that community and that sense of trust. So measuring that is very different than, River Pools and Spas, who is looking to sell more pools and more installations. So it's very different what you're gonna track and report on. But if you don't have your data set up when you start your content marketing, how are you going to know if you're successful or not, or what's working? So the data is critically important, but not just data for the sake of data. That's, data with no strategy is just numbers. So it's not going to tell you anything. But once you connect your data to your strategy, that's when you can tell if you're making headway, if you're starting to succeed.
Brian, where does content marketing, where should that live? Is this something that belongs in-house, or have you seen success with it? You're talking to a couple agency guys. Can it live there? Or maybe the bigger question is, let me ask this, is how do both play well together? Maybe an outside agency along with an in-house team that's focused on content.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are some great content marketing agencies out there that focus specifically on that. And I think agencies are great. I think they are spectacular at getting you going in the right direction or helping with, heavy projects. If you really need to create a lot of content all at once, probably better off using an agency or using freelancers to help supplement that. But really to get the consistent voice and, mood and tone that you want your brand to communicate, really ideally should come from internal people who are, communicating with each other. They understand each other. They understand what the priorities are. They can all stay focused on the messaging. They know what everyone else is doing. So much of the time when you work with an agency, you end up with great content and great stuff, but it doesn't connect to everything else that's going on in your company. And that's one of the things that Cleveland Clinic has done so well. And Salesforce is another example of that. They have put content marketing contacts in every one of their different departments who can then make sure that everyone's on the same page when there's a new initiative. How can we, get everyone working together to elevate this? Let's take it from all the different aspects so that we're talking to all of our audiences individually on the right time at the right place, and we're not leaving someone out, or we're not, forgetting some content that we had over here that we put out before that's great, that's useful. But, a lot of times if it's sitting off in a library somewhere, it's sitting on the back of somebody's website and they forget about it. If you're not having these conversations with everyone and bringing these people into all your meetings, then you're leaving things on the table.
Brian, something you had said just now, which I really picked up on and I applaud, and I think it makes a lot of sense. It's like you got to get the what down, but when you were talking about, that voice, the how is every bit as important. And I think that's a lesson for any brand. And it's like we're talking about getting that what down, but it's like everyone, every brand, every person has a different personality and a different voice. And how, Brian, Pat, and Kurt, all three of us could be given the same piece of information, whatever, and say, okay, deliver it. Brian, you're going to deliver it differently than I am. And Pat, it's like, it's got to be authentic to you. And that's probably the lesson there. And that's probably where you're going. And I think you're absolutely spot on. It's got to be true. It's got to come from that DNA, that soul, that voice. It's who you are. And that's what people buy into and believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with, all the AI content that we're seeing more and more of, and it's just going to keep growing. Without that voice and, without that specific personality attached to the content, it's just going to be a sea of, of plain content. So yeah, critical to establish that voice and create that personality for your own brand.
Brian, since you touched on it, I'd love to get your take on, you can't open up your phone, take a look at it, or whatever you're consuming right now. There's an article about ChatGPT, right? It's everywhere. What's your take on maybe the good and bad with AI? Where do you see things? Just give us your take.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in AI, and AI has been around for years and people have been using it in marketing for years, but really ChatGPT brought it to the forefront and really socialized it and normalized it for everyone. Now everyone's just going on and playing. And I think it's an amazing tool. It's like a calculator or Photoshop or any of those tools that we use to help us do our jobs better. I think it can help us be more productive. I think it can help us in immense ways with ideation and creativity and just bouncing, creating an outline and bouncing your ideas off of the outline that it creates and seeing what's better and what you're missing. When it comes to the actual writing of content, I see it falling short. It's, you can't rely on it from it's not going to cite any of the resources in there. It's not going to, not all the time, it's not going to give you accurate information. We saw that with, when Google launched their AI, it cost them $100 billion from,
right.
one mistake. So we just have to be very careful about how we're using it and how we're leveraging it. But I'm telling all of our content creators and all the groups that I work with, go play with it and experiment with it and try it. It's going to fit into all of our lives and all of our workflows. You better start figuring it out now, or you're going to be playing catch up or sitting on the sidelines while your competitors are racing past you using it, because it definitely helps with all sorts of things. And, anything that you don't like doing about your job, figure out how to get AI to do that. I mean, I think it's an amazing tool. I think it's going to change the search landscape. I think we're going to see so much AI created content. Google's going to have a hard time. Bing's going to have a hard time figuring out what is valuable and what's the best answer. And does it matter that it was created by AI or created by a human? I think humans are going to prefer to read content that has a particular voice and style and tone that they can connect with. I think it's going to make communities even more important. So instead of going to Google to learn about content marketing, you're going to go into, a community of people who are experts in that and ask the questions in there and get human answers.
We're getting close to wrapping up, Brian, but I got a couple other things I just want to ask you. One is, again, using this kind of scenario of a company that wants to get more into content marketing. Would you recommend a certain channel to go into first versus other? And by that I mean, are blogs still relevant as opposed to, let's say somebody was going to do video on a frequent basis and answer questions, right? Like, do you, has the needle moved? It's like now, yeah, you really should be thinking about, whatever channel. Yeah.
Yeah, video is certainly, taking more and more dominance over other channels, but it really comes down to where your customers are consuming. If your customers are in a particular demographic where they like to read blogs or they check their emails every day, that is the channel that you should focus on. But you should also consider what channels you're good on. I mean, if you can speak well and you're personable, maybe a blog isn't the best choice. Maybe a podcast or a video is the better choice for you. But if your audience isn't on that channel, then it makes no sense. I mean, don't try to send millennials emails because they're not going to open them. So you have to be careful about which channels you pick from an audience perspective and just from, a personal perspective. Where do you deliver good content?
Brian Piper, you've been a busy man. What's next for you now that the book is coming out on the 7th, correct? Is that the published date?
March 7th is the published date.
What happens now? Where are you going? What are you thinking? You've always got a lot of irons in the fire. So what's happening with you with that?
Yeah, I mean, my full-time job, I've got some great projects going on over there. We're doing some great institutional governance projects around analytics and content optimization, really trying to get everyone on the same page. So that's keeping me busy. I've got a lot of conference presentations coming up, CEX conference and Content Marketing World and High Ed Web and a bunch of these other great fun events. And starting the next book. I mean, that's one of the things that Joe told me. He's like, once you do this, now you should get on a routine. Every 18 months, you should have a new book. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of work to do. So he gave me some tips on, different ways to make it easier, but it's the same thing. It's consistency. You have to commit to writing, a couple times a week. You have to sit down and put the time in. Otherwise, you're not going to be ready when, the next 18 months, 2-year time frame rolls around. So, and then my wife and I have 6 kids between the two of us, and we've got our own, things going on. So we got lots of irons in the fire, never slow times, but so exciting. So much going on.
That's so cool, man. Hey, I got a question for you, and maybe you and Joe had this. I was just thinking about this when you were talking there, Brian, did you guys ever not consider a book? Okay. And by that, I mean, did you ever consider, it's like, hey, Joe, what if we publish this as in a newsletter format? Or what if we did something else that's not a book format? Did that question come up at all? Or did you guys kick that around? Or it was like, no, it's always going to be a book?
Yeah. I mean, since it was a second edition, we were pretty sure right from the bat that it was going to be a book. But then, as we got into the Web3 chapter, we were like, well, what if we did this as like a series of NFTs that people could buy? Or if we did this as, you have to get a token to be able to get into the book. And then when we got to the section on AI, we're like, this is moving so fast. What's going to happen if we go into this production with the book and 6 months later now is actually when it comes out? What's going to change? I mean, everything's going to change with AI in 6 months. Right. It's a whole new landscape. So, that's where we figured we could maybe do this as, a bunch of online articles, or do it as a big, like opt-in blog or something like that, where we would start capturing users. But really, when we looked at the people our audience who's going to be consuming this, they like to have that physical copy that they can look at and go back to. And, the success of the first book really led us to know that, this is a book. Now we've got a bunch of extra things, bonus items that will come along with the book. We got templates and, dashboards that people can download, and all sorts of different extra material that will, give us other ways to connect with our fans and our readers. But we knew it was going to be a book.
Awesome. Brian Piper, thank you so much for being on Over a Pint. As a tradition, the guests have the last word. So whatever you want to promote, the mic is yours, sir.
Well, Pat, Kurt, I can't thank you enough for having me on the show. It's been a great conversation. Anyone who's looking to connect with me, brianwpiper.com. And I'm Brian W. Piper on almost all the social channels. I love talking about data, Web3, AI, all these wonderful new technologies, and always thrilled to talk about content marketing, content optimization. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Brian, thanks so much. That's it, guys. That's a wrap.